Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name is Ivana Harinque if you're new here, and if you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is November the 5th. It is Friday, and today I'm joined by what is likely a familiar face, and that is our own political and Montgomery reporter, Mike Kaysen. Now, what we're going to talk about today and break down for you today is something that could affect you, your children, and your businesses, and that is two bills that are currently bills regarding vaccine mandates in Alabama that are headed to Governor Kay Ivey's desk this morning. Now, we know Governor Kay Ivey's communications director did say late last night that the governor had the goal of signing these bills into law by this afternoon. There are two separate bills. We're going to break them down, answer your questions in a minute. But just for a quick overview, one bill deals with kids and teenagers, because they're considered minors, that are not going to be able to receive COVID-19 vaccinations without parental consent. That is one bill. And then a second bill regards businesses and says that businesses cannot fire employees who say that they will not be vaccinated against COVID-19 due to a religious or a medical exemption. There's a lot to unpack here in these bills because that's the kind of the surface level of the bill, Mike, but I know there's a lot of details underneath those two big umbrellas, and there's a lot of questions we have here. But let's start out by saying these are the bills that are headed to the governor's desk. We expect them to be signed this afternoon. Now, let's talk about the kids one first, right? Because we know that everybody has been very, especially those with children, have been very interested in the fact that kids are going to be able to get vaccinated against COVID-19 here pretty soon. Kids ages 5 to 11. We know that teenagers were already eligible. So, Mike, go ahead and give us kind of the overview of that bill, and then we'll get into the kind of the nitty gritty.
Okay. Thanks for having me, Ivana. Yes, the bill that passed last night is a very short, simple, like 3-page bill, and it just says, and this applies only to COVID-19 vaccinations, not any other vaccinations that schools require or anything. It says that minors cannot receive a COVID-19 vaccine without parental consent, and minors is anybody under 19. And it's that's all it says.
So something that we should note here is, like you said, minors, the state of Alabama considers to be under the age of 19.
Right.
So this doesn't even affect these new shots that are coming out with those kid-sized doses of COVID-19 vaccines for 5-year-olds to 11-year-olds. This affects teenagers who are already eligible to be vaccinated against COVID-19. Now they cannot get that shot without parental consent. Mike, when would this go into effect, assuming it's signed into law?
That's a good question. I guess it would be immediately. Let me look at that. See if I can pull that up quickly.
And while you look up that, I will go ahead and kind of preface something that I want to talk about as well. And this deals with schools too. We know that schools under this bill will not be able to ask students if they are vaccinated against COVID-19. So, Mike, after you look up that and see if you can find that when it goes into effect, let's talk about the school angle of this. And I know that this is something we'll have to do a little bit deeper dive on because this is all really new and breaking. But if a school cannot ask the student if they are vaccinated, what exactly does that mean?
That's a good question. And by the way, it does take effect immediately if the governor signs it today. I don't know what kind of difficult position this would put schools in. This bill didn't get as much discussion as the other one we're going to talk about in the legislature. But I did hear it mentioned that this has been an issue in the Huntsville area with kids getting shots without their parents' permission. But, state law sets 14 as the age of medical consent. If you're 14, you can consent to medical treatment. This will be an exception to that. And so you can consent to any treatment except a COVID shot.
So those ages of 14 to 19 are the ones that are really affected by this bill. If you were under 14, you already had to have parental consent prior to this bill,
Right.
which again, we expect to be law. But excuse my dog in the background. That's just working from home life. I think we all have at this point, right? But those 5 years, 14 to 19, they were eligible to get a vaccine. And that doesn't have anything to do with those new kid-sized doses. They were already eligible to be vaccinated. They could go, say, after school, especially those of these high schoolers that are driving to school. They can leave school, get their vaccine, go home without even having to tell their parents. But now this law, what we expect to be a law, will ban that essentially.
Right. And I don't know how prevalent that was happening, but it won't be allowed now. So that's the change.
Right.
Between
And
14 and 19, or 14 up through age 18, you have to have your parents sign off on it, which, some of the people, some of the Democrats in the House last night, as they were right before the final vote on this bill, were questioning that and saying, an 18-year-old who's supporting themselves would not be able to get a COVID shot without their parents' permission, which they question the wisdom of that.
well, and that's an interesting argument, Mike. We know that people can enroll to serve in the Army at 18, or in the military, I should say, at 18. And you could do that, but you would not have the option to get a COVID shot without your parental consent. We also know a lot of teenagers work. I know that I started working, I don't remember if it was 15 or 16, but even then, you're getting you have your own job, you have your own paycheck coming in, and that still bans you from getting a vaccine without getting your parental consent. So that's an interesting shift there. But something to note is this doesn't change all medical treatment, that 14 guideline. This is just solely for the COVID vaccine, correct?
Correct. Yeah, that's the only thing this affects. Affects no other vaccinations, no other medical treatments.
Which I think is
it's
something that
understandable that the parents who don't trust the vaccine or don't want to take the vaccine for whatever reason, they don't want their 14 or 15 or 16-year-old getting it without their permission. So, I mean, I can really see both sides of that issue.
Right. And then the other side of that is, well, this makes this look very political when you can get any type of other medical treatment past the age of 14, but just for the one exception for being the COVID shot. I'm sure opponents of this bill had that same argument.
Yeah, that's a good point also. Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, and if you have questions about this bill, we'll go back to them. So feel free to leave them in the comments here. Let's go on to the second one. And that is about businesses not being able to fire employees for saying that they will not get vaccinated against COVID-19 for a medical exemption or a religious exemption. Now, we're going to get into this in a minute, but the government, we know the federal government has imposed this guideline of the early January 4th, for private businesses that have 100 or more employees to require COVID-19 vaccines or weekly testing. There's a lot of kinks to be worked out there, but that's kind of the overarching theme, right? That might be simplifying it, but that's the basic rule there. So this bill, again, means that private businesses in Alabama cannot fire somebody if they do not wish to be vaccinated against COVID-19 for a religious or medical exemption. Mike, break down how that's going to work and how that kind of competes with that federal mandate.
The bill creates a standardized form, so every business will have the same form. And if an employee refuses, if the business has a vaccine mandate, and an employee does not want to take the vaccine, business must give the employee an opportunity to fill out this form. And it just has, I think it's 6 places to check a box. And you can claim a religious exemption, or you can claim, there's 4 or 5 different categories of medical exemptions you can claim. One of those medical exemptions would require signature of a licensed healthcare provider. But the others would, essentially just be the honor system. And the religious exemption would just, be the honor system. It would not be questioned. And the law says that if an employee fills out the form properly and submits it, they get the exemption. So it's really not going to be any review of it or anything. It's just, you want the exemption, you'll get it.
There's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot of questions, Mike. And I know you and I were talking about this a little bit even before we went live, but the honor system is something that is hard to go on just in general, especially when it comes to something that you really can't check. Again, if somebody says that they have a religious exemption, well, we know that most of the major religions have not announced any type of religious exemption that they have in their doctrines for the COVID-19 vaccine. But a person could say that, and a business is not necessarily going to investigate that, right? You could just check that box and kind of have that loophole.
Right. If you want the way it appears this bill is intended is if somebody wants to be exempt from taking the shot, they can be exempt. And people opposed to the bill really questioned the point you're making is that there's it's very easy to get the exemption. On the other hand, I think the intent of this was, to give people a chance to turn down the shot. And I know some of the people that there were a lot of people from the public who came to the State House last week and this week who were very animated and against the vaccine mandates. And they did not even like the fact that you would have to claim an exemption. They just said, this is a freedom issue, and you can turn down you can turn down a shot. You don't have to take a shot that you don't want, and you shouldn't even have to claim an exemption. You should be able to just say no and keep your job. So they didn't even like the bill that was being I didn't talk to them after it finally passed, but they didn't like the fact that you would have to claim an exemption. They thought you should just be able to say no.
But Mike, and I don't have children in school, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but if you refuse a vaccine that is already required in school, there's 6 or 7 or 8 of them that you have to get to go to most schools, most public schools, and even most private schools require you to have those vaccines. You can claim a religious exemption for that, but you have to have a religious or a medical exemption for those other vaccines. You can't just say that you don't want them.
Right. Yeah, this appears to be treated much differently, as you're pointing out.
That's just an interesting thing to add. And another interesting thing, and if people, and I can link this here as well, but if you caught last week, I think it was last week, a video I did with local attorney Barry Ragsdale, we talked about the governor's executive order. And what he said was kind of just a political statement of the governor saying, look, my state agencies are not going to follow this mandate, and that is her right as governor. But she didn't have much control over private businesses because those private businesses are regulated by OSHA, which is a federal agency which falls under that federal mandate. That's my oversimplification of this. But keep that in mind. We talk about this bill, again, private businesses could allow that exemption. Well, if you're a private business and you operate under OSHA, would you not have to still follow that federal law? What means that what nexus is the state going to use to come in and put their law above that federal law?
That was a big concern from the people like Robin Stone, the head of the Business Council of Alabama, said, look, we've got these companies that have these federal contracts. They don't have a choice. If there's a mandate, they've got to follow it, or they could, they're going to be audited. They could lose those contracts. Then you're talking about a lot of people losing their jobs because these companies would lose these contracts. So, that's the point that they were making. This puts these companies in a tough bind of they don't have any choice but to follow the federal mandate. And now there's a state mandate that they are a state requirement that is somewhat in conflict with that. So, although the federal mandate also has the religious and medical exemptions, and what Senator Chris Elliott, the sponsor of the bill, said that he had heard those were being denied on a wholesale basis. I don't know, I don't know the specifics on that, but
so basically it sounds like what you're telling me is there is no clear language in this bill that says how the state plans to make this legal, essentially, or maybe not legal, but plans to enforce this in regards to that federal mandate. There doesn't seem to be any clear cut, this is how we can do this is why we can do this, and this is the direction that we're going to take.
Right. That is not clear. And I don't think anybody can make the claim that this is going to preempt the federal mandate.
And again,
I don't think anybody was making that claim.
Right. So we know that private businesses regulated by OSHA, and this is an OSHA rule. So we would expect the federal law to again trump that state mandate and be able to take effect over the state one, even though it does seem, again, there are probably some religious exemptions for that OSHA mandate with the vaccines and the weekly testing. So that's going to be something I feel like we're going to be just covering until it unfolds. Mike, I know that the federal guideline is in December, the private business guideline is in January. It seems like that's going to be a kind of game day decision, as we say a lot. Things are going to happen that day, and we're really going to figure out who's in charge then.
Right. And even the people supporting this, or at least some of the people supporting this bill, this that puts in state law an exemption, they were acknowledging that this is probably going to be settled in the courts. And one thing I wanted to point out is this is the bill that if the governor signs the bill today, it does not even mention the Biden mandate. So it's not specifically about Biden's federal mandate, although I think that was why it came to the forefront. But it just applies to any business that wants to require their employees to have a vaccine. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a large business. Any mom and pop business that, wanted to say their employees get vaccinated, they would have to offer that exemption. And that's a step the legislature, if you'll recall back in earlier this year, the legislature passed that vaccine passport bill, but it did not affect businesses. It did not say businesses can't require a vaccine, but so now they've taken that step with another.
Something interesting that we should note here is another piece of this puzzle, how Alabama's an at-will state. And what that means is businesses can fire you for pretty much anything they want to do. Employers have that right. Now, there are, of course, some exceptions, some federally protected classes and things of that nature. But overall, an Alabama business can say, you're fired. They don't have to give you a reason. So Alabama has long prided itself on this, right? Alabama has long said, look, we pride ourselves on making our own decisions. And if we want to fire you, we'll fire you. Well, this seems to be an opposite step. This is government coming in and saying, no, you can't fire that person for this reason. It just seems like a very interesting dynamic to put into that at-will state clause.
That is a point that was made a number of times when this was being debated, is that we're an at-will state. Now you're taking away some of the authority for employers to make those decisions. And so they put a clause in the bill that said this does not affect any other grounds for, it does not affect the autonomy of businesses to make those decisions on any other grounds except this one issue of a COVID vaccine.
Just a lot of questions here, Mike, and something that I think somebody's already actually pointed it out here in our comments. But just a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks ago, Governor Ivey said that vaccine mandates and all of the issues that come with vaccine mandates is an issue that should be decided in the courts, not in legislation.
Right.
Now we've got some legislation that, again, the governor's communications director said the goal is to sign it into law this afternoon. Right. That looks to me like legislation. So what do we know about the governor? Has she had a shift here, or what is she saying that kind of goes against that statement she made just a few weeks ago saying this should be fought in court and not in legislation?
Well, I think if and when she signs the bills, I think she'll be asked that, and we'll hear what she says. I know that this session was supposed to be about redistricting, and they finished that. And last week, the session only lasted a week. And last week, the House Speaker, Mac McCutcheon, whose word is important, he said that we don't expect to take up any COVID vaccine bills in this session. He said, we're concerned about that, and we're working with the governor and the AG on that. But we think courts are the best way to do that, also, and that changed. So I guess the situation changed, and I think it's probably just, I think they're hearing from a lot of people that hate this mandate or that could be affected by this mandate. And it seemed the ground shifted pretty strongly there in over a week or so, to where we're not going to fool with this legislatively to yeah, we're going to do something, try something.
I like the way you phrase that. The ground really shifted in just a week, 2 week span of saying, look, we're not going to go this route. And then it seems that there has been a 180 on a lot of our politicians say, you know what, actually, we are going to go this route. And it'll be interesting to see if the governor does sign these 2 bills into law this afternoon, if she does release a statement as to why she thinks that this is the way to go instead of relying on the court system to take care of this. Now, this is definitely an overview. I know you're going to have more for us on AL.com later on, Mike, but what can we expect, and when can we expect a resolution from the governor's office on these 2 bills?
Well, as you said, the communication director said late last night, that the plan is to try to sign the bills today, that they're going to have their legal staff review them. And so I think we'll know by the end of the day whether the governor is going to sign these bills. And then we'll see what happens after that. I haven't heard the Business Council of Alabama had put out a statement last night saying they were still opposed to the legislation. That was before the final changes were made, but they weren't major changes. So I haven't heard from them today, but I'm sure we'll have more pushback from businesses, I would think.
It is going to be a long Friday, Mike. I know you've got a long afternoon ahead of you, but we thank you for explaining some of this to us. Again, this is all very recent, and there's a lot of changes that people probably are just now waking up to if they have not seen kind of the ongoings and the making of the sausage the last couple of days. You wake up and you say, "Oh wow, this is a big deal." So, Mike, thank you for explaining this to us, and we will all keep an eye on AL.com this afternoon for more of your coverage.
Thanks for having me.
Everybody watching, thank you so much. If you have questions about this, please drop them in the comments here, or you can email myself or Mike. We will put our email addresses in the comments as well. Again, thank you for watching. Have a great and safe weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.